The reading will be from Romans chapter 1, verse 20. Romans chapter 1, verse 20. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Romans 1:20.
By the way, just in case you didn't know, the Wilcoxes will be flying out Tuesday to Austria, not Australia. So it's Austria, and Brent's still kind of recovering from a cold, and I know they'd appreciate your prayers not only for travel, but for healthy travel. And so they're about to set on an adventure, and this is the last time we'll get to see them for a little while, and then we'll hear all these stories when they get back, and they'll be taking lots of pictures. We're going to miss them, for sure. We missed you. This morning, we were up at Bellevue. Turns out that when you get married, you still have to share your wife with her family. And so we went up there and got to spend some time yesterday and then today. And we had potluck and then an additional service. And the short ending of this is that Sarah's pretty wiped out. So I made her stay home. And she regretted not being here tonight. But I want to pass on her regards to you. And we're always feeling blessed to be home, and so I'm here representing her as well. She's more of a summer person than anything, and so she's having to say goodbye to summer. It's on its way out here pretty soon. I'm more of a fall person, so it's one of my favorite times of year. So I'm trying not to be too happy around her, but she did admit she's looking forward to like having when the snow's outside and having a fire and the baby's here and everything. We're looking forward to that. But I really like this time of year because it's not too hot for me and it's not too cold. I don't know if any of you like autumn like I do. And one of the best parts, of course, is the leaves. In fact, I noticed this morning, I knew I was going to be talking about this tonight, so I was kind of keeping an eye out. And for once, I noticed it a little early. Some of them are starting to turn. Probably some of you better at noticing. And so every year, the leaves are going to change color and fall off, and they blow around on the ground. I remember reading a short story by O. Henry, and he said it's Jack Frost's calling card. That's what a leaf is. I thought that was pretty good. That always comes to mind. Some don't like all the raking. I know some of you are not looking forward to that, and some of you don't like the cold. But I think all of us would have to admit, no matter what your favorite season is, this is when the world gets a little extra beautiful. And I think that's one of the reasons I like it. I know in the summer series, we addressed the idea of the seasons, and I find it interesting that God created the world, and he made it a point to tilt it slightly. And you might think, well, it has to because that's the way the system works. But keep in mind, God could have done anything he wanted. I think he intentionally tilted the world and made the system that way so that we would go through these seasons every year. I think he did it on purpose. He intentionally made it so that every year we experience a process in 4 parts. Technically, I guess I looked it up. I never do, but I happen to this time. Fall starts in 3 days. I think that's right. Some of you know that. I usually don't look it up, but we got 3 days. And but to me, it kind of feels like fall right now. Everything God created has great intention behind it. I really believe that. And without getting too crazy about it, this evening I think we can use autumn to learn some important things. This time of year it brings something in particular to our attention, and it might at first sound kind of grim. Right now, during autumn, one of the most prevalent themes is death. I actually, where I teach, we do chapel every morning, and so this was kind of on my mind, so I thought I'd kind of bounce it off the kids, and we had a short lesson on this very thing, and I was talking about how the leaves are changing color, and before I could even get to it, a kindergartner raised his hand. He says, "They're dying." It was something he had recently learned. I guess everything a kindergartner learns is recent, but it was something that was obviously on his mind. That's what had kind of stuck out to him. That's what you're seeing, is that the leaves are dying. And for him, the idea was kind of fascinating, but it didn't throw him off. He was kind of excited to know this bit of information. And I don't think, when I'm thinking clearly, it doesn't put me off either. And it's kind of weird that I like this time of year so much when that's one of the main things that's going on. You can imagine if it was different, like if it happened to birds. If the birds turned color and died, dropping from the sky. Say, look at all the dead birds, how beautiful. That would be a whole different setup. Having to rake the dead birds, that's, you wouldn't want to jump into a pile of them either. But anyway, but for the same reason, I think God set up creation. When the leaves die, it's beautiful. I think he did that on purpose. I think he did this for a very important reason. It's a way for God to remind us that if you belong to him, even death is beautiful. I love this verse, Psalm 116, verse 15. These verses may not be obscure to you, but I find them relatively new to me. But I bet you've heard this one. Psalm 116, verse 15 says, "Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his godly ones." Kind of like leaves. Proverbs 14:32 says, "But the righteous has a refuge when he dies." It's a hiding place, a refuge, shelter. The world's always, the world thinking is always pushing a darker image of death, and it's not easy to maintain a clear perspective of what it's really like. But the leaves are a good reminder. God has a very different perspective of death than we do. World ideas lie to us about death all the time. And every year, in a sense, the leaves tell the truth. The leaves not only remind us that there's beauty in death, but there's another thing that leaves tell us, and that's that death is temporary. Can you imagine if somebody was visiting? I don't know where they would come from, where this would be the case, but let's say they came from a different part of the world and they were inside it all the time and they had no clue or concept of what seasons were, and they're spending time with you and summer's coming to an end and fall arrives. And then they figured out what all the colors meant, they might panic. Say, the world is decaying. Everything is over. It's all shriveling up and falling apart. You would have to pull them aside and say, no. You have to reassure them. Say, it's all right. Everything's fine. This is a very temporary thing. It's not permanent at all. There's a stretch of time, you'd have to explain it to them, where it's going to get colder and darker. But after that, there's an incredible recovery. And without fail, every time it happens, life returns. It's almost as if to prove this point, and I think it was one of the points, Jesus did this for Lazarus. That's in John 11. We've read it many times. But Jesus brought Lazarus back from death. That's incredible. If you really, really believe this happened, and I do, John 11:43, when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The man who had died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. That last part he spoke to the people there. Unbind him and let him go. But I also like to think that's what he said to death. Unbind him, let him go. What Jesus did for Lazarus, calling him out of the grave, I don't know if you ever thought about this. He's going to do the same thing for us. John 5:28. Notice the similarities. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth. Those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment. See, I don't know what the last thing is that I'm going to hear. I don't know what it is. I know the next thing I'm going to hear. And it's kind of exciting to realize that that's how it works. The very voice that said, let there be light, is going to say, let there be life. And he's going to say, get up, it's time to go. It's going to be, I think of it as the ultimate snow day. I just found this getting ready for this lesson. I don't know if you ever noticed this. Isaiah 28:18. I like this. Your agreement with the grave will not stand. It's like your contract's canceled. Jesus tears up that contract that we had with death. And every year the leaves remind us that death is not the end. I really believe that's one reason that every year God has the world die. That's what's going on. The last event on this world is going to be the end of an autumn. You might think of it that way. There's an odd verse in Isaiah 26, and strangely enough, the dead are compared to seeds, and actually more like brand new children being born. It's Isaiah 26:19, if you want to take a look. This one always kind of startles me. It's pretty strong imagery, but it's a whole different idea of what death is like, and when that's over. Isaiah 26:19, you who lie in the dust awake and shout for joy, for your dew is as the dew of the dawn, and the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. So every year I think this year, because I really like fall, as I've already said, I think as it comes around, like right now, I've got 3 days before it's official, and I think I'm really going to enjoy it. And then it flies by again. I'm still processing that summer is over and that things have changed. But by the time I get a grip on fall, it's starting to snow. It seems like it's just here and gone. And that's why I looked up the first official day. I thought, okay, I've got 3 days to brace myself to really pay attention this time, because I drive by the trees, I don't even notice. So I'm going to really try and pay attention to this changing of the leaves in it. And I think that too reminds us of how time flies, how short this life is. James 4 talks about how it's like a vapor. Psalm 144 says it's like a passing shadow. And there's verses that describe it. I found them. One describes life as like a guy running by, a really fast runner, or a fast boat. And one verse describes it as an eagle diving to catch something. It's fast. That's the point. To make things more interesting, God apparently designed us so that the older you get, the faster time goes by. I have a theory that, like, for instance, like today, this 24-hour period, it's just a small fraction of the time that most of us have been alive. But John Jack does a pretty big hunk of his life. And we'll have to ask him later, but I bet for John Jack, today was a long day because he's only one of a few. So when the leaves change, it's a reminder that our life moves fast, and the world has only so many autumns left. I don't know if this is the last one, and that's okay. I'm reminded that I better pay attention, that I better make sure I'm ready to leave. But even when I take these things to heart, I still miss out on this beauty every year because I get busy, I get distracted. In fact, it's very possible for a whole day to go by and I won't notice the leaves at all. In fact, I'm lucky if I notice there's trees. It's one of the main challenges of living in our culture is we're constantly distracted. Luke 10:38. I like reading this to remind me. It says Luke 10:38. Now, as they were traveling along, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary, who was seated at the Lord's feet, listening to his word. Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? And tell her to help me." But the Lord answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her." And it's like Chris has been talking about on Wednesday night. We started a class last Wednesday about being able to be interrupted. That's really a lot of what goes on in the Bible when people are interacting with God. The unimportant drowns out the important, and if I force myself to slow down a little and not be so distracted all the time, maybe I'll notice the leaves this year, and maybe that'll help me focus on what matters. The reason I brought this up, by the way, last week, the whole reason for this lesson is last week I read something that I didn't know about leaves. This is just written by this guy who was making observations about autumn in particular out in New Hampshire, and he's writing about them, and I didn't know this. The reason the leaves are changing color is what happens. You probably know about chlorophyll. That's the green stuff, and that's what feeds the tree. You need that green stuff so they can eat sunshine. Well, the trees stop making chlorophyll. That's the green stuff. And the green fades. Those colors that you see, I found this pretty interesting, they've always been there. It's just that we can't see them until the green leaves. Pun intended. It's not noticeable until that green goes away, and then that's when you see all the colors. But the colors were always there. The green is caused by this chlorophyll that feeds the tree, and the beautiful fall colors of the leaves come from a substance called carotenoids. They're called carotenoids, and that's what's red and orange and yellow. It's all from carotenoids, from what I understand. But there's something odd about these carotenoids, this substance. At this point, as far as we don't know what purpose they serve. It's kind of strange. Chlorophyll feeds the tree. And that's why the tree continues to sustain the leaves, because they need the chlorophyll to feed them. It's kind of an arrangement. Carotenoids don't feed the tree. But the tree, now this is where it gets strange, the tree continues to keep sustaining the leaves, even though they're not getting anything in return. It would make more sense, even this guy pointed out, for the trees to just shut it down quickly, drop the leaves, and start storing up energy for winter. But every year, trees everywhere support something that has no practical value, at least not yet. Some trees actually add another chemical to they make the leaves even brighter. And again, gives nothing to the tree in return. What this means is that every year at autumn, trees everywhere do something that seems to have only one purpose: beauty. There's actually a student who used to go to Highland. He's in the Czech Republic right now. His mother reminded me he's studying carotenids. They are currently, these physicists are trying to figure out what purpose they serve. And I bet you they'll come up with something that science will find why God designed this. But I know one reason he did it. It's because he wanted things to be beautiful this time of year. God did it so that we could see the trees change color and see something beautiful. It's possible that it's to remind us about all the things we've mentioned tonight. I'm going to read Psalm 4, verse 4. I'm going to read this as a section because I think it's helpful to get the context with everything that we have to say in mind. I'll read this and I'll point out one particular phrase. Philippians 4, starting with verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentle spirit be known to all men. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there's any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. The things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. He's saying, don't be anxious. You can have peace. It doesn't always come easily for us. But to support this state of mind, says he tells us what to think about. And notice that it includes whatever is lovely. He's saying, think about that. Just think about those things. Because we tend to focus on the worry stuff. So we're surrounded by a beautiful world, and this time of year the leaves might remind us of the peace that belongs to us. If we're right with God and focus on what is lovely. The guy who wrote this, by the way, as far as I can tell, I don't know what he believes, but there was not much there as far as any spiritual application. But he lives where the trees are exceptional. He loves the changing colors, and he points out he feels like it's kind of sad. A bunch of people come there from all over, tourists from everywhere, and they come there to see the changing of the leaves. That's why they drive out there for miles. They leave their houses, come out and stay in hotels to see the changing of the leaves, but they mainly go there and arrive in town and go shopping. And he finds that kind of sad. They end up being just tourists. They catch glimpses of the trees in the distance, but in order to really appreciate it, he says you have to go out there, get out of your car and walk among the trees. And he shakes his head sadly that they're so close and yet so far. They came to find something and then end up missing out on the very thing they're looking for. And I got to thinking the writer's doing the same thing. He spent a lot of time focusing on the beauty of the leaves, about how amazing trees are, and that carotenids seem primarily about producing beautiful colors for us to enjoy, but he never took that last step. He just kind of commented on it. He never considered the unavoidable conclusion that all of this implies a creator. I think it's ironic that this writer is admiring something clearly designed and failing to see the God that is behind it all, so close yet so far, kind of like the people who come out his way. Romans 1:20, what Chris read for us, is very relevant. It says, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. It's obvious. It's a no-brainer. The will of God is found only in the Bible, of course, But there are some basic messages that can be found in creation. And the first message is very simple. There is a God. And maybe we can just use the leaves to be reminded of a few other basic messages, all of which you can find in the Bible. Here's a few. In the hands of God, death has beauty. The death of someone who belongs to him is precious. Death is temporary. Time is passing by fast. There isn't much of it left. And don't be so distracted that you become blind to all the blessings that you have. And don't forget to focus on the things that are lovely, that are provided by your Creator. And maybe most important of all, just like the guy who loves the beautiful leaves but still doesn't know the Father, it's possible to be so close and yet so far. Make sure you're right with God. That's one of the reasons we get together like this, is to encourage each other to make sure. Is everybody okay? Kind of checking in. Is everybody all right before we go out about our business? That's why we're here. When we're singing this song here in a second, we're encouraging you to make sure that that's in place, that you're okay with God. It might be a matter of coming forward and to be baptized or to ask for prayers, whatever it takes, whether it be maybe pulling somebody aside afterwards or even a phone call. The leaves are going to be falling, and in some ways they are messages from a God who provides blessings, from a God who provides beauty. And one of the main things that these leaves tell us is that death is not the end, but it's very important that you face death with Him. For someone who is not a Christian, I guess the best way to put it would be so close and yet so far. That's something that needs to be made right. And the only way I know to do that is to be baptized into the death of His Son, the one and only price paid for sin. If you're a Christian, you have a few months with beautiful leaves. After that, other beautiful things are on the way. But in the meantime, look around and see the beauty and remember the Creator who loves you that much. Pray you'll think about this while we stand together and sing.
I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the Master of the sea heard my despairing cry, from the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. All my heart to Him I give, ever to Him I'll cling. In His blessed presence live, ever His praises sing. Love so mighty and so true merits my soul's best songs. Faithful, loving service to Him belongs. Love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me, when nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Souls in danger,